Recorded live from Portland, Oregon, it's the Transamorous Network podcast. Let's get it on. Okay, we're back.
We're talking with Tommy, an author and trans-attracted man who has done some wonderful articles, which we can share on the page, right?
Yes, we will.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Tommy. Welcome back.
Thank you. And Tommy, I am going to ask you to send me that quote when you get a moment. So the quote you offered in the previous episode. So while we're talking specifically while we talk generally about trans attracted men, we also talk to trans women. And one of the things I want to acknowledge in this conversation for the trans women is the following.
What you got to say?
Some trans women believe that the only men who are interested in them tend to be more effeminate, less macho masculine than the type of men that they would prefer to be interested in. And it's I have a theory on why those kind of men, and I will include myself in that group, and in my opinion, I would include you in that group in the sense that you're more connected to your emotions than, it goes back to what you're saying about men kind of suppressing their emotional content. I have a theory on that, but I want to hear your perspective on this perspective that trans women have about the men that are interested in them. And if you could speak to the trans women, if you feel this is the case, about the advantages of those kind of men that are interested in them. Obviously, not all trans-attracted men are effeminate men. But for those who are, what would you say about that phenomenon?
I don't think effeminate is the right word, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah. Not feminine.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like so often just being connected with your emotional self and being okay with who you are and being open-minded, that gets perceived as feminine because masculinity has become so incredibly toxic.
Yes.
But I don't know, in terms of like more feminine men being interested in trans women, I think that might be the case. I think I've also met very masculine, macho type men who have been interested in trans women. I don't know. I think, this also brings up an important point that the trans community is not a monolith, that I think so often in these conversations, the trans community gets talked about like they all have the same opinions about something, and that's just not the case. So some trans women might prefer feminine men, some trans women might prefer more masculine men.
So it is true that the trans community is not monolithic, just like any other group of people in any way you could slice humanity. Some of the trans women that reach out to us, of course, we're going to get the more, if I may use this word, not to derogatize your perspective, Tommy, but the more aggressive or the more activist trans women who have very strong opinions about everything. And one of the things, like we had several comments from a trans woman on our YouTube channel who was demeaning the men, including Troy, which I didn't understand because I think Troy is one of the most masculine men I've ever met, but demeaning the men that we had on the show for being soft. And so I think there is like a halo effect of the toxic masculinity that you referred to a minute ago that spills into the perceptions of women and trans women that have them reflect that back to the men which reinforces the toxic masculinity that is held on by the men. And this causes the story dynamic to get really complicated between when men and women, whether they're trans or not, are trying to interact with one another. Do you follow what I'm saying? I
think it's sorry. Well, I think there's plenty of women who definitely perpetuate toxic masculinity in their own way too. I think the main issue is often coming from men, but so often I hear women talk about how a man shouldn't do this or shouldn't do that or shouldn't be too emotional. So this problem is perpetuated by plenty of different people, whether they're men, women, trans, or cis. But there's so many different opinions in the trans community. It's important to I think it's important for cis men to take a step back and listen, do more listening than talking, and be sensitive to the fact that there are a lot of hurt people out there.
Yeah. So you, in your articles, you brought up Julia Serrano, and she actually was brought up by one of the guests we tried to interview from, it wasn't Thailand, but a guy who lives in Southeast Asia and teaches out there, and the connection was so bad we couldn't air the show. But how did you come to know, to be aware of Julia Serrano, and what do you think of her contribution to the dynamic between cis men and trans women getting together in romantic relationships?
I don't remember how I first discovered Julia Serrano. That would have been about 5 years ago. Okay. But so I was reading a lot of that sort of literature at the time. But I think her contribution is very important. Just sending this message that trans people are in fact desirable, are in fact worthy of love. It's been a while since I've read some of her work, so I'm trying to remember what exactly. Do you have that quote on hand by any chance?
It's funny you mentioned that, because I do. I'm going to read it. It's kind of long, but it's very appropriate to what we're talking about. So it was the speech that you referred to in your article called "The Beauty in Us," and in it she says. This is why I get really frustrated when people automatically presume that any person who is attracted to or has sex with a trans person must automatically have some kind of fetish. This is extremely invalidating, and insinuates that we trans women cannot be loved or appreciated as whole people, but rather only as fetish objects. Sure, there are some people who are specifically attracted to the fact that we are trans, but some of us might find that to be uncomfortable. I should say, and some of us might find that to be uncomfortable or annoying. But I also have experienced men who were presumably unaware that I was trans, staring rather obsessively at my chest. But nobody ever seriously accuses such people as having a breast fetish or being breast chasers, because breasts are seen as perfectly normal and a valid thing to be attracted to. Similarly, there are people out there who specifically date people because of their money or social status, but nobody ever accuses them of having a fetish. People only use the term fetish when they believe the person in question is inherently undesirable, and I refuse to buy into that mindset.
That's very powerful. I think there's a lot of men out there who do fetishize women. I don't think that attraction to trans women is inherently a fetish at all, but there is an act of fetishizing trans women that a lot of men do. They treat trans women as if they're an object, and I feel like these men are doing it to themselves. If they treat their attraction like it's a dirty little secret, that's what it becomes, and they're hurting.
Trans women play right into that as well.
Say more about that.
Well, trans women are putting themselves in situations to be fetishized as well. You know what I mean? Being on Craigslist and looking for people purely in a sexual context what more do you expect than someone looking for just sex? You know what I mean? It goes back to what we've always said. It always takes two to tango, and it's not just the men contributing to this. You know, trans women who are seeing men as not manly enough, I think, are trying to have their own lingering masculinity overshadowed. Wow. So one of these women who is looking for a man who's not man, or who's more manly, or who's less or more masculine, or whatever their terms are, they're looking for someone to compensate for something in themselves, right? We're looking at stories that match each other. Yeah. And so I think trans women, you know, those who have that story really need to take another look at the gentlemen who are showing more interest, who you would consider feminized or effeminate. You know, again, what's superficial and what's the real meat of what you're looking for? Someone who's going to love you for the person you are, someone who's going to accept you for the person you are, someone who's going to be with you, see you, be seen with you. All of those things that trans women are really looking for, you know what I mean, are going to be more often found in a man who's in touch with his own sensitivity. And it takes a stronger man to be in touch with his sensitivity and to treat you the way that you want to be treated than to just fall in line with all the other boys and do what boys do.
This is what Remy just said is so interesting because, first of all, I think she hits on all of the points that we make throughout our content, which is for trans women, the trans women cis man relationship dynamic is a two-party proposition.
Absolutely.
And I agree with Remy. We want to be careful not to paint a broad brush, but I think Remy is onto something when she says that perhaps one of the reasons trans women look for men who are less sensitive, that's a way better word than effeminate, who are less sensitive, emotionally sensitive, is a overcompensation for their own insecurity.
It's an overcompensation of either their own insecurity or
relative
the fact
to their own masculinity,
right? Or you know, to have their whatever lingering masculine, remember that maybe they be masculine physical traits overshadowed by the manliness, the strength, the bruteness of the more manly guy. And I don't know what better words to use, but you know what I'm trying to say, because I don't see anyone as. I see those sensitive men as more manly because they are true and honest and know themselves and are in a place and are ready to have the relationship that you are really looking for.
Yes.
You fuck with fuck boys, that's all you're going to get is fucked. Just saying.
That's there's so much that you've said that's like spot on. And so it's like there's this toxic masculinity that trans women are looking for, not all trans women, some trans women are looking for as a compensation, and as they go out and look for that, they reinforce that toxic masculinity among the men when they reject the men who are coming at them with emotional sensitivity.
Again, everyone's feeding into the stories for each other, and they're perpetuating the negative stories. And we're not, of course, I'm not trying to paint with the broad brush. I'm not talking about all trans women, but we're talking about those trans women who have these stories.
Yeah.
The ones who are complaining on our group that the men we're presenting are not manly enough or aren't you know, strong enough for them.
Yes.
What is it? I mean, and trans women are strong women. We are strong women. It takes a lot of life to get to be the woman that you are. And even the meek ones, we are stronger than half the women out there. You know what I'm saying? And so it does take a strong man to be with a trans woman, in my opinion. But that doesn't mean, I think the thought of what strength means is confused. Their story of what strength means. A strong man has no emotions, has a big barrel chest, and you know, drinks beer all day.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah,
you know, plays sports. Whatever.
Yeah.
And like that's what they think is strength. Not a man who is in touch with himself to cry. A man who is strong enough to be seen with you and not give a damn.
Or a man who can feel a strong emotion and not express the emotion in violence.
Right.
Like who sit face to face with a trans woman and have an argument, for example, but not lose themselves to the degree, like it's not mature to have an emotion and then react out of that emotion with physical violence. That's not mature.
No.
Right? And so if you're looking...
That's what a child who can't communicate does.
That's exactly right. A man resorting to violence out of an emotional confrontation is throwing an adult version
of a temper tantrum. Absolutely.
That's exactly right.
My godson is 2 years old. You know, he uses sign language to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
He, in my opinion, is deciding not to use his words yet. Okay. Mm-hmm. But he has those moments where he can't communicate what he's feeling. And so, like, it revolts in anger. So he'll just throw something. Mm. And I'm like, no, that's not what we're doing. Mm-hmm. You want to talk about it? Let's talk about it. Let's communicate. Let's learn to use the words. You know what I mean? And then it's having that conversation with him. That's not okay. We don't respond in violence. That's not okay. Let's sit down and let's talk about it. And even though he's not talking, we can still have a conversation, right? Because I don't want him to grow up to be that man.
Got it. And in a lot of, I guess, Tommy, you were talking about how men, I don't think you used the word hurt, in pain. You said that a lot of men are in pain as a result of this toxic story that exists in society and their own interpretation of that story as they reflect upon themselves. Mm-hmm. And so... We I don't know how much you've looked at our content, Tommy, but we talk a lot about these things called stories, which are the views that people take on, their beliefs they take on about the world around them, and the stories create the reality consistent with the stories.
Well, it's the world around you, but it's also the stories you carry about yourself and the people that are in your world and of the world.
Yes. So if a guy is feeling insecure with his emotions because he is in pain, like he didn't have a person like Remy in his life when he was 2 years old who taught him how to handle their emotions better. Right. Then
these are the stories. These are those deep stories that I always talk about. Yes. These are, right. It's the 2-year-old who's throwing his temper tantrum and responding in violence and anger because he doesn't know how to express his emotions and communicate what's the problem. Yeah. Right. It's being there at that time so that the story does that. So that string doesn't get tied in a knot. I don't want that thread tied in a knot, and I don't want him to build on top of that. Yeah. Let's give something else. You know what I mean?
So this goes back, Tommy, to your comment earlier about the excitement you felt and generally feel when you discover a new dimension of who you are. And it takes an emotionally secure person to feel excitement and maybe a sense of adventure in self-discovery.
Yeah.
Especially if that self-discovery, this is so great, if that self-discovery is going against the general stories that society holds about who you are.
But I think we're seeing a lot more of it. More and more people, especially the younger generations, are coming in with a better story. Yeah. You know, it's almost like they're not letting those old stories of the ones behind ever take cement. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who knows?
So we haven't let Tommy speak very much. So Tommy, I'm curious. So there's this aspect of the trans attracted community, and we don't know how large it is. I presume it's larger. The closeted population is larger than the non-closeted population, and it seems perhaps that that population, the larger population, is composed more of older men than it is of younger men, the closeted ones. What would you say to those? I mean, you're 25, you said? 20. Mm-hmm. What would you say to those older men, given what do you say to these older men who reach out to you and they express their genuine fear of how their world might come crashing down if they are public about loving trans women?
I think sometimes it's a very good thing to have a toxic world come crashing down. I'm not going to say it's not hard. Yeah. It could be the hardest thing you've ever done. But, if it's confronting horrible, judgmental family members and saying, look, this is who I am and you can accept it or not, maybe do you need to confront your horrible, judgmental family members? I mean, it might seriously damage your relationship for a couple of years. I've had relationships damaged by me coming out, but you heal, you repair, and things end up better than they were before. I'm not going to say that it'll be easy. I talked to a trans attracted man who came out to his boss. He wanted to bring his trans partner to a work party, a work Christmas party, and he was fired the next day. And
Wow.
his performance was not a problem. So he was essentially fired for him being in a relationship with a trans woman. I'm not going to say that there are not serious risks to coming out. I'm not going to say that it's not hard, but I mean, look at the world around you. Is this okay? Is this really acceptable? Living in the shadows and treating people like this, sending the message to trans people that they are a secret, that they're a fetish, that they are, you know, something to be ashamed of. That's not acceptable. That's not how we should be treating people. And yeah, I don't know. I guess, we can talk to each other, we can look for support in our own community, but and one thing I should mention though, I do send this message a lot about the importance of coming out and being yourself and whatnot. I should mention though that there are some trans people who prefer to be stealth, trans people who can pass as cisgender, and you should absolutely never come out if that means outing a partner who is not out herself. If you are going to be putting your partner in a dangerous situation or an uncomfortable situation by saying, I'm trans attracted, this is my trans partner, and everyone's like, whoa, she's trans, I didn't know that. That's not okay. So I guess, we have to be careful about this, the way we talk about coming out, but I guess when I talk about coming out, I just mean being true to yourself, treating trans women and all women better, and not projecting your shame onto other people.
I just want to add to it. I love everything you just said, Tommy, and I just want to add that for those guys who don't give a damn about how the trans community feels, just think about how you feel yourself hiding in the closet and the shame and exactly. Well, and discomfort that you feel, and how much relief can be realized by owning who you are. So I want to acknowledge, so everyone knows who watches the show, that I'm married to a cis woman, and I want to acknowledge that you yourself, Tommy, are no longer in a relationship with a trans woman. You have a cis woman girlfriend. And how long have you guys been together?
6 months.
Okay, and you said that she is aware of your trans attraction?
Yeah, and I think that's another fear that a lot of men have when it comes to coming out. Yeah. Most trans attracted, if we're going to use that word, or men who are attracted to trans women, most of them that I've talked to are also attracted to cisgender women. They're just attracted to women in general. And that there's this fear that if they are honest about finding trans women attractive, that cis women won't like them anymore. And I have not found that. I'm not going to say that that's not something that will happen with some cis women, but that has never once been an issue with me. I'm always honest on dates and in relationships with cis women about this. If it's something that they can't handle, then I don't want to be with that person anyways. But
right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I've never had an issue with a cis woman rejecting me because I've had a relationship with a trans woman. So sometimes our fears are just that. They're fears, they're not reality. But, yeah.
I've had experiences of not many of trans women having a problem that I'm trans attracted but married to a cis woman. And the story dynamic seems to express itself as, if you're trans attracted, why are you with a cis woman? And that seems to fly in the face of the truism that trans women are women. And so
those women still have a story where they see themselves as another.
Yeah, as yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's my take on it. You know, if you have a problem with the fact that you are with a cis woman, what is it in me that feels like there's a difference between me and that woman? Like, right, do I see myself as woman who happens to be trans, or am I a transgendered woman? Right? Or a person who is transgender, period.
Yeah.
Right? It's that it goes into that possible third category of not fully being in a place within yourself.
Yeah.
You know?
Tommy?
Sorry. I don't want to speak for the trans community, but I have noticed, I think, a spectrum of opinion about some trans women do see themselves as an other from cis women, and some trans women want to be, essentially exactly the same as cis women and be themselves as such. And I think we should just be respectful of both opinions. I think sometimes there's like cultural differences, like, in Thailand, there's 1,000-year-old trans community, and they very much embrace not being like cis women.
Right, it's like the Hijra of India as well.
They call themselves a third gender often, and but there's varying opinions. All opinions on this subject are valid. Some trans women want to be seen exactly the same as a cis woman, and we should view them as such. And so, women who hold that opinion might find the idea of trans attraction offensive, and we need to be sensitive to that because, they don't want someone to be attracted to them for their transness. But yeah.
It's interesting because the Julia Serrano quote that I read a minute ago, or maybe it was in the previous episode, speaks to this, Tommy, where she says, I relish the fact that a man is attracted to me because of my transness, and in the same way that a woman might a cis woman might relish a man attracted to her because she's beautiful, and so or because she has a nice personality. I mean, it's just a quality of attraction. So I get what you're saying. It's very interesting how we're in this episode. We're unpacking so much story dynamic. And I'm hoping that the men who are watching this show are getting a lot from it, because I personally am getting a lot of enrichment from our conversation. And I'm also hoping that look at the time. I'm also hoping that the trans women watching this show are getting it too, especially a lot of what Remy has said, because Remy is really touching upon aspects of stories that trans women have that not only impact but impact the dynamic of meeting men, but it also creates a reality for the trans women who have those opinions that make it very difficult, if not impossible, to find a relationship with a man. Yeah.
Right.
Very
or
interesting.
at least a fulfilling relationship.
Yes, that's right. They have relationships, but
Right.
yeah. Well, Tommy, it was great to have you on the show. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we have not asked you about?
I think I should just say that I enjoy these kinds of conversations a lot, and I think that this is very important to bettering the situation of both cis men and trans women. So if anyone has questions or wants to talk to me or needs to just need someone to listen, you're welcome to include my email in the
Great.
description of the video or something. It's tommatt1119@gmail.com. I'll give that to you. But
Great. Thank you.
Feel free to reach out to me and talk anytime.
Great, thanks. And then, Tommy, one last thing. What would you say? So let's say you're sitting across from a trans-attracted man, and he's like, I'm just having a hard time with this. What would you say to that man?
I would say, take your time. It's okay to struggle with this. It's okay to acknowledge that there's some real challenges to being more open to your friends and family. But the important part is that you grow, you do try to challenge yourself, you do try to treat other people better, specifically trans women. And then I would encourage them to lean on me and lean on other cis men who have already gone through this journey and who are willing to talk about this. Because I think oftentimes, cis men get into a relationship with a trans woman and they put a lot of weight on that woman, and they want her to help him work through the challenges that he's having. Trans women have their own struggles that they're going through, so you can lean on other people in your community like myself. I also just, if there's some very serious challenges in your life that you're trying to work through, I always encourage people to seek therapy. Therapy is a wonderful thing. Too many men don't take advantage of that resource. Just spending an hour talking to a professional who is literally paid to listen to your problems, that's amazing. Like, make use of that. So.
Right?
Yeah.
Well said.
Here.
Yeah, and thank you so much for making yourself available, Tommy, not just for our show, but for our audience. And I'm sure you're going to get some guys probably reaching out to you as this show lasts on our channel. All right, folks. I almost ended this like the Tiny House podcast. So what do we normally say on the show?
So step up, tune in, and stay tuned.
Bye, everybody.
All right, thanks for having me.
It's been a while. We don't know what we're doing. Thank you, Tommy. It's been a pleasure.